The day I became the most hated man in Lakeside Estates was also the day I learned just how much power $500 could buy, especially when it came with a dose of vengeance. That was the fine Karen Wellington and her iron-fisted homeowners association slapped on me for the crime of fishing with my daughter. What they didn't realize was that I had $4 million in the bank, a reservoir of spite, and every intention of using both. My name is Remy Thorncraft, and until 2 months ago, I was living what many would call the American dream. After 15 years in venture capital, investing in startups and riding the highs of tech booms, I cashed out with enough to retire at 42. I thought I had it all, until life reminded me otherwise. Last year, my wife Rachel lost her battle with cancer, leaving me alone to raise our 14-year-old daughter, Solon. Grief nearly swallowed us whole, and the only thing that seemed to bring us peace was fishing, an activity that had always been special to the three of us. Determined to start fresh, I searched for a place with water, somewhere quiet, healing. Lakeside Estates ticked all the boxes: elegant homes, great schools, and a serene 6-acre lake at its heart. The realtor mentioned an HOA, but brushed it off as routine: lawn care, paint colors, nothing intrusive. I should have noticed the pause before she mentioned the HOA president, Karen Wellington, and her devotion to maintaining property value. I'd dealt with difficult personalities in boardrooms. How bad could a suburban administrator be? I found out on a crisp April morning, as Solon and I spent our Saturday casting lines from a wooden dock, the lake mirror still, the moment peaceful, for once. Solon was beaming, having just reeled in her second bluegill, when a clipped voice sliced through the calm. She appeared like a storm cloud in designer sneakers, late 50s, athleisure that looked like it cost more than my first car, and that unmistakable "speak to the manager" haircut. She carried a tablet and a look of pure offense, as if we'd tagged the dock with spray paint. I introduced myself, tried to be friendly, told her we'd recently moved in. She didn't so much as glance at my extended hand. "Fishing is explicitly prohibited," she said with chilling finality, tapping on her tablet. "You're in violation. The fine is $500. Solon stiffened beside me. I explained that the realtor had pitched fishing as a key amenity, a reason we'd chosen this neighborhood. Karen's smile never reached her eyes. "Regulations changed last month," she replied, flipping the screen to show a dated document. I hadn't seen any such notice. "Check your spam," she said, dismissing my concern like an errant leaf on her perfect lawn. When I asked why fishing was banned, she cited vague, environmental and safety concerns, while eyeing our modest tackle box like it was radioactive waste. The hooks, she claimed, disturbed the wildlife. The smell, the bait, unpleasant for residents sipping coffee on their patios. But it wasn't the fish she seemed bothered by, it was us. Her tone turned clinical, cutting. "New residents sometimes struggle to adapt," she said, glancing at Solon. The message was clear: we didn't belong. I bit my tongue, shielding my daughter as she blinked back tears. This lake was supposed to be our refuge, a link to Rachel, a step toward healing. Now, it felt like a battlefield. "We'll pack up," I told her, voice low, wrapping an arm around Solon. Karen's smile reappeared, cold and triumphant. "Excellent. Do check your email more carefully in the future, Mr. Thorncraft." She turned and strode away, the click of her sneakers lost in the manicured silence. Solon whispered as we gathered our things, "Why was that lady so mean?" I didn't have an answer fit for a 14-year-old. "Some people like rules more than people," I said instead. That evening, curiosity led me to dig through my inbox, no notice, not even in spam. So I dug deeper. What I found painted a different picture. Karen Wellington wasn't just the HOA president, she owned a boutique real estate firm that specialized in high-end communities. Her social media was a scrapbook of lakeside parties, loud music, clinking glasses, right there on the same dock she fined us for using. Most revealing was something buried in the fine print of the HOA documents: the lake wasn't technically HOA property. It was listed as a common amenity, shared by all residents, no clause giving Karen or her counsel the authority to ban fishing unilaterally. That night, I looked out my window and saw Karen at the gazebo with friends, wine glasses catching the porch lights. If this was the game, I'd play. But first, I needed to understand the board. The next morning, while walking the neighborhood, I met Merrick Henderson, a retired attorney with a kind face and a slow-moving golden retriever. I mentioned my run-in with Karen and watched the warmth drain from his face. "Ah, our neighborhood dictator," he muttered. "Let me guess, she slapped you with a fine." He invited me for coffee and promised stories. I accepted. That afternoon, in a house filled with leather-bound law books and fading photos, Merrick laid it out. "Most folks don't know it," he said, flipping open a thick folder, "but the lake isn't HOA property. It's owned by the original developers, Meridian Development Corporation. The HOA just leases recreational rights." He tapped the page. "That means the rules they're enforcing. Not as ironclad as Karen wants you to think." The lease, as it turned out, was the key. Merrick tapped a section of the document, the date highlighted in bright yellow. The HOA didn't actually own the lake, they just leased the recreational rights to it under a 30-year agreement with Meridian Development, the original builders of the community. But that lease? It was set to expire in less than 2 months. My eyes locked on that date. 2 months. That's how long we had before the entire balance of power could shift. Technically, Merrick said, adjusting his reading glasses, Meridian could renew the lease, sell the lake to the HOA, or to someone else entirely. Most residents assumed the HOA owned everything, but the truth was far murkier, and far more dangerous. And Karen Wellington? She wasn't just enforcing obscure rules. She was preparing for a land grab. Merrick had heard whispers through his legal contacts. Meridian was struggling financially, desperately trying to offload assets to stay afloat. The lake was one of the last unencumbered properties they held, and Karen knew it. Over the next hour, Merrick and I combed through property records, business registries, and court filings. What we found was a pattern, and it wasn't pretty. Through a network of shell companies linked to her real estate firm, Karen had been quietly acquiring distressed properties all over lakeside estates, homes sold in desperation after being bled dry by a relentless stream of fines and violations. Now, she was setting her sights on something bigger. "She's not doing this for the HOA, Merrick said grimly. She's doing it for herself." According to his sources, Karen had been in private talks with Meridian to buy the lake, not on behalf of the community, but as a private investor through her firm. She planned to restrict resident access and develop the shoreline into high-end real estate, a handful of luxury homes that could bring in millions. The fishing ban suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't about the smell or the hooks. It was about control. About reshaping the narrative. About softening the community up before locking them out completely. To understand the full scope of her game, Merrick introduced me to another neighbor, Samuel Washington, a retired bank owner with the calm intensity of someone who spent a lifetime reading people for a living. In his study, lined with books, photographs, and files, he brought up a spreadsheet on his computer and began to walk me through it. "I started this as just a personal record," he said. "But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. Karen's enforcement isn't just strict. It's targeted." The data told a chilling story. Homeowners of color received violation notices at nearly triple the rate of white residents. Newcomers were fined for infractions that longtime homeowners were never cited for. And most telling of all, properties that sold below market value after repeated fines frequently ended up owned by shell companies, all connected, eventually, to Karen's business. She was methodical. Ruthless. Smart enough to obscure her tracks using a web of LLCs, Lakeside Investments, Wellington Holdings, Sierra Vista Properties, all seemingly separate, but ultimately tied back to her. Samuel showed me 6 different homes acquired this way in just 5 years. Each followed the same blueprint: death by HOA paperwork, a pressured sale, followed by a quick flip and resale at a premium. Merrick nodded as we pieced it together. The lake's her endgame, he said. Meridian, overleveraged from failed commercial projects, was desperate. The lake wasn't always meant to be a quiet sanctuary. The original 30-year-old plans actually called for lakeside condos, scrapped only because of stricter environmental rules back then. But those rules have changed, Samuel added, tapping the screen. And Karen's got friends in the right places. If she pulls this off, she could put 6, maybe 7 luxury homes along that shoreline. That's 7, 8 million in revenue. My instincts flared. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore, this was a distressed asset, sitting on the edge of prime land, ripe for redevelopment. It was the kind of deal I used to hunt in my VC days. And it was personal. Over the following week, Samuel put me in touch with some of his former banking colleagues. Through discreet back-channel conversations, we confirmed what we'd feared: Meridian was in real trouble. The pandemic had wiped out several of their key tenants in a major commercial development. Credit lines were maxed. Bankruptcy loomed. The lake, valued at around $300,000, was one of their last clean assets, and they were eager to unload it fast. Meanwhile, Merrick started quietly organizing gatherings, small, rotating meetups in safe spaces. Samuel's study. A side room at the local library. Even the back corner of a neighborhood bakery, shielded by the scent of fresh bread. There, stories spilled out like confessions. They cited me for holiday lights, said they were too bright. I've had the same ones up for 15 years, said James Morris, a retired teacher. Funny, that violation came right after I criticized her at a town meeting. Maria Gonzalez, a nurse and foster mom, shared her story too. My kids were banned from the pool for being too loud. Karen's grandkids showed up 5 minutes later. Diana Winters, a young widow, told us how Karen led a surprise mosquito inspection of her backyard, and days later, slapped her with 5 violation notices. When I asked why my neighbors hadn't gotten the same, she said maybe this isn't the right community for someone in my situation. Each story revealed the same playbook: isolate, pressure, and break. And in nearly every case, the aftermath was the same: compliance or retreat. But not this time. Samuel built us a secure group chat, an encrypted backchannel for sharing information. We were building a resistance, slow and quiet. And while Merrick gathered stories, I dug into Karen's finances. As a seasoned investor, I could spot red flags buried in the fine print, and Karen's empire was full of them. For all her bluster, Wellington Properties was dangerously overleveraged. She'd maxed out credit on her existing holdings, likely to fund renovations and maintain appearances. Her lavish lifestyle, designer clothes, private events, catered HOA meetings, was being floated by borrowed cash. If the lake deal fell through, she'd be exposed. This isn't just about greed, I told Merrick and Samuel one night. This is survival. She needs this lake to keep the house of cards from collapsing. Suddenly, everything shifted. We weren't just dealing with a power-hungry bureaucrat. We were facing someone who had everything riding on this play, and that made her more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. Samuel suggested I meet Robert Chen, a real estate broker with inside knowledge about the lake. We sat down at a coffee shop 20 minutes outside the neighborhood. Karen's trying to buy the lake for about $300,000, Robert said, keeping his voice low. She's got an exclusive 60-day negotiation window, but Meridian's desperate. If someone came in with cash up front, they'd likely take it. Then he leaned closer. Wellington Properties. It's smoke and mirrors. She's leveraged to the hilt. This lake is her make or break. He didn't need to say more. I already had a plan forming. A distressed asset. A motivated seller. And me, a man with the means and motive to stop her cold. But as Samuel wisely advised, we'd need to wait. Let Karen dig herself in. Let her announce the assessment. Let her believe she's already won. Then we make our move. Put her reputation on the line, with the community and with her creditors, then we pull the rug out from under her, Merrick said, his voice steady, almost surgical. I nodded. The more energy, money, and political capital Karen spent believing she had already won, the more devastating the fallout would be when it all unraveled. And when it did, the community would see the truth, that they'd been used. So, as our resistance grew, more neighbors, more data, more insight, we maintained total radio silence about our endgame. To the outside world, even to Karen's network of informants scattered across the neighborhood, we appeared to be nothing more than a handful of fed-up residents documenting HOA overreach. That illusion was crucial. Karen knew we were meeting, her retaliatory enforcement tactics confirmed it, but she had no idea what we were actually planning. And we were ready. Our investigation had yielded everything we needed to move to Phase 2. Robert discreetly arranged a meeting with Tom Branson, the Meridian executive handling the lake sale. As I prepared, I could feel the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just another business transaction, it was the hinge on which everything turned. We were nearing the point of no return. The meeting was held in a private conference room inside a downtown law office, far from the HOA's reach. Tom, as Robert had predicted, was candid and visibly stressed. Look, he said after formalities, we gave Wellington Properties a 60-day exclusive window. But there's a clause, we can entertain other offers if the deal closes fast. Karen's still scrambling for investors. Meanwhile, we needed that money yesterday. What's her offer? I asked. $300,000, he replied, rubbing his forehead, stretched over 18 months. It's a mess, complicated structure, uncertain guarantees. Our CFO wants to liquidate cleanly, now. I nodded, leaned forward. I can offer $350,000. All cash. Close in 7 days. Tom blinked, then sat up. That would definitely get the board's attention, he said, clearly surprised. But I should warn you, Karen has pull in local government. She won't let this go quietly. I smiled. I'm counting on it. 2 days later, I had a preliminary agreement in hand, pending only a standard environmental review, which could be completed within the week. To maintain secrecy, I formed a new entity, Thornycroft Holdings LLC, to act as the buyer. Unless Karen took the time to dig through the registration records herself, she'd never link it to me. But something must have tipped her off. The next morning, my mailbox was flooded with new violations. Improper weed control. Unauthorized landscaping stones. A complaint about my mailbox height, unchanged since I moved in. And a $200 fine for my garage door being the wrong shade of taupe, despite being painted with the HOA's own approved palette. In just 2 weeks, I'd racked up nearly $2,000 in violations. When I tried to appeal, the process was mysteriously stalled, forms misplaced, hearings rescheduled, emails unanswered. It was clear, Karen had escalated her campaign. She wanted to break me. One afternoon, Sen ran inside to grab her phone, leaving her bike in the driveway for 15 minutes. When we returned, a violation notice was taped to the door, complete with time-stamped photos. Someone had been watching. Stalking us. And it wasn't just us. Maria Gonzalez was fined because her lawn exceeded the limit by exactly a quarter inch, measured by Karen herself. James Morris got dinged for a bird feeder he'd had for over a decade. Diana Winters received a trash violation for placing her recycling bin 6 inches too close to the garage. It wasn't enforcement, it was targeted bullying. But the backlash had begun. Every absurd citation Karen issued added fuel to our cause. By the 3rd week, our encrypted chat group had grown to nearly 30 households, a full quarter of the neighborhood. Then came the moment that pushed everything too far. Sen came home from school crying. They say we're troublemakers, she sobbed. Brianna said her mom told her we don't belong here. Brianna's mother, I later learned, was Karen's closest ally on the HOA board. That night, after Sen was asleep, I called Merrick. My voice cracked. I'm thinking about selling. This is hurting her. That's exactly what Karen wants, he said firmly. She's done this before, 6 families that I know of. She pushes them until they sell below market, then her friends swoop in. Don't give her that satisfaction. He was right. Leaving wasn't the answer, not for Sen, and not for me. Later that evening, I got the final report. The environmental review came back clean. Meridian's board had accepted my offer. The lake, 6 acres of water and 10 feet of shoreline on every side, was mine. And the timing? Perfect. The very next day, Karen had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting. She was planning to announce her grand vision for the lake's future. Architectural renderings had already been previewed on the community bulletin board, plans to reduce the lake by 20% to make way for a private, members-only lounge. A lounge that just happened to sit on the lake's most popular fishing spot. I told no one, except Merrick and Samuel. Meanwhile, Karen launched her final offensive, a $50 per month special assessment on every household, supposedly for critical lake maintenance. She stood at the front of the HOA clubhouse, framed by a PowerPoint presentation titled Elevating Lakeside Estates, a Premier Vision. For 20 polished minutes, she laid out a sparkling dream: better lighting, improved walking trails, exclusive access to lakeside amenities. What she didn't say? That her own real estate firm would be handling all construction and sales. That she was already lining up buyers. And then came the smear campaign. Without naming names, she spoke ominously about new elements in the community, people who don't share our values, who create division, who threaten our stability. It was subtle, but clear. She was talking about me. Samuel, God bless him, stood up from the crowd. We need to talk about the truth, he said, his voice calm but defiant. I watched from the back. The final act was about to begin. Samuel bravely stood up to defend me, only for Karen to publicly humiliate him by dredging up a long-resolved tax issue from his past. I find it interesting, Karen said with mock sweetness, that Mr. Washington feels qualified to lecture us about community standards, when he himself had to negotiate with the IRS over unpaid taxes just a few years ago. Perhaps we should focus on getting our own houses in order before criticizing others. It was a low blow. Samuel had indeed faced an audit, but it had stemmed from a clerical error and had been fully resolved. The way Karen framed it, though, made it sound like he was a tax cheat. The meeting unraveled further when Safra Duskland tentatively suggested that perhaps a community vote should be taken before implementing such drastic changes to the lake regulations. Karen fixed her with an icy stare. Safra, I believe your flower shop lease renewal is coming up soon, isn't it? It would be a shame if there were complications. The threat was barely concealed. Safra immediately backed down. Watching this public display of intimidation, I felt a strange sense of calm. Karen had no idea her grand plans had already been derailed. The lake she was presenting as the centerpiece of her vision no longer belonged to Meridian, and it would never belong to her. The satisfaction of knowing what was coming almost made up for the months of harassment. Behind the scenes, Karen had been using her connection with Mayor James Wilson to create administrative pressure on me. Suddenly, my home was subject to random safety inspections, and questions arose about building permits for renovations the previous owner had completed years ago. The mayor didn't dirty his hands directly, of course, but his building inspector, Karen's cousin by marriage, had suddenly developed a keen interest in the structural integrity of my deck. The pressure was mounting. When Sen came home crying for the 3rd time in 2 weeks, this time because her classmates were excluding her based on rumors about our family, I almost gave in. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Meridian's lawyer confirmed that Karen had just been informed the lake property had been sold to an anonymous third-party investor, and that all negotiations with her were officially terminated. Hours later, Karen was on my doorstep, her composure visibly cracking. "What did you do?" she demanded, skipping pleasantries. I know you've been talking to Meridian. Did you sabotage my deal? I smiled pleasantly. I have no idea what you're talking about, Karen. Though I did hear the lake property was sold. I hope the HOA has a good relationship with the new owner. Her eyes narrowed. This isn't over. The HOA has a binding recreational use agreement. Whoever bought that lake can't change access without our approval. I think you should check the terms of that agreement, I said, still calm. From what I understand, it expires in less than 30 days, and renewal is at the sole discretion of the property owner. Karen's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. The community won't stand for this. We'll sue for right of access. Good luck with that, I replied as I gently closed the door. The next 24 hours were fascinating. Karen called an emergency HOA board meeting, closed to the general community. Through our network, we learned she was frantically trying to identify the new owner and develop strategies to maintain control of the lake. She even enlisted Mayor Wilson to investigate zoning restrictions and explore eminent domain claims, all of which Merrick assured me were legally baseless, given the property's history and private designation. Over the next week, Karen grew increasingly desperate. She convened a legal committee meeting, claiming the HOA would fight to maintain lake access. The mayor began making noise about zoning regulations and public use mandates, but as Maya confirmed, none of them held legal weight. Meanwhile, I quietly met with a water quality expert and a local conservation group to assess the lake's ecological health. Their findings were alarming. Years of unregulated lawn chemicals from surrounding properties had caused abnormal algae growth, and the fish population was stressed. The HOA had been neglecting the lake's actual environmental health while using environmental concerns as an excuse to restrict activities like fishing. I also consulted with a security expert to begin planning for property management and surveillance. Karen, unaware of any of this, decided to make a bold move. She organized a massive lakeside party for all original homeowners, conspicuously excluding newer residents, to reassert community rights to our lake. It was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, complete with catered food, live music, and wine bars stationed at each end of the shoreline. What she didn't know was that I had already filed paperwork to terminate the recreational use agreement early, citing multiple maintenance violations. My attorney confirmed that the HOA's failure to maintain environmental standards provided ample justification for early cancellation, though the agreement was due to expire in less than a month anyway. I decided this would be the moment for the reveal. As the party hit its stride, around 60 residents chatting, drinking, and socializing, I arrived with Merrick, Samuel, and two unexpected guests, my real estate attorney and a local police officer I had briefed in advance. I walked calmly into the center of the gathering and picked up the microphone Karen had been using for announcements. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this beautiful day at the lake. Karen rushed over, seething. This is a private community event. You weren't invited. I held the microphone firmly. Actually, Karen, I think there's been a bit of confusion about who should be inviting whom. I nodded to my attorney, who handed me a document. As the legal owner of this lake, and all surrounding property within 10 feet of the shoreline, I'm informing you that you are currently trespassing on private property. A stunned silence swept across the crowd. Karen's face flushed red. What are you talking about? This is HOA property. No, Karen. It never was. It belonged to Meridian Development, until 3 days ago, when I purchased it outright. I held up the deed. Effective immediately, I'm terminating the recreational use agreement, which was set to expire in 28 days, anyway. I gestured to the officer beside me. I've asked Officer Reynolds here to help ensure an orderly departure. You have 15 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the premises. Karen looked as if someone had doused her in ice water. You can't do this. The community has rights. Actually, I can. And I have, I replied. Officer Reynolds also has a trespassing complaint ready to file if necessary, but I'm sure that won't be needed. After all, Karen, you've always been such a stickler for the rules. As murmurs rippled through the crowd, I continued. For those wondering, this is what happens when power is abused unchecked for years. Consider this a lesson in consequences. The party dissolved quickly. Guests gathered their things, casting accusatory glances at Karen as they left. Several approached me privately, expressing a mix of shock and, surprisingly, respect. About time someone stood up to her, one longtime resident whispered. This has been a long time coming. Within the week, I installed private property and no trespassing signs along the lake perimeter and hired 24/7 security. I also held a small press conference with the local newspaper to announce my plans to convert the lake into a fish conservation and environmental education area. The lake has been environmentally neglected for years, I explained. Water quality tests show concerning levels of phosphates and nitrates from chemical runoff. Our team will be restoring the lake to a healthier ecological state. Community reaction was mixed, at first. But when news leaked about Karen's plans to build private lakefront homes for personal profit, public opinion shifted dramatically. Karen was livid. She tried to sue me for destroying community value, but her case was dismissed immediately when my attorney presented the deed and the expired access agreement. She then attempted to weaponize the HOA, pushing for fines, restrictions, even trying to place a lien on my home. But by then, many residents had begun to question whose interests she was really serving. The tide truly turned when Safra. It started with a tremor, Safra Dusklan's voice, shaking but resolute, breaking the silence of an HOA meeting that had long served as Karen Wellington's personal stage. I've been on this board for 3 years, she said, her fingers gripping the podium, and I've watched Karen manipulate regulations, target specific homeowners, and funnel HOA funds into projects that just happen to benefit her friends' properties. Gasps whispered across the room. Last year, we spent $80,000 renovating the North Side Park, a space used by 10 homes, all owned by Karen's Circle, while denying basic playground equipment for the main park that serves dozens of families. It was as though someone had thrown open a window in a room gone stale. Safra's bravery was a spark. At the next meeting, voices long silenced came pouring out. Residents who had once looked away now stood and spoke, about threats, favoritism, absurd fines. Someone proposed a motion to audit 5 years' worth of HOA finances. And just like that, the illusion of unity around Karen began to crumble. But instead of turning their frustrations on me, the community turned inward, eyes once narrowed in suspicion now widened in realization. Karen wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was ruling it. Sensing momentum, I made my move. I announced a new initiative, free fishing passes for all children in the community, with one exception. Children of current HOA board members wouldn't be eligible until their parents stepped down. Was it petty? Perhaps. Was it effective? Absolutely. Within days, parents who had once scoffed at me began showing up at my door. Even Veronica Palmer, once Karen's most vocal ally, arrived, sheepish. My son wants to learn to fish, she said awkwardly. Your daughter mentioned a junior conservation program. We're launching one this Saturday, I replied calmly. It focuses on ecology, sustainability, and fishing. Sealand's helping to organize it. I let the moment hang. But it's only open to families without current representation on the HOA board. Veronica hesitated, her face flickering between pride and panic. I've been reconsidering my position, she muttered. Recent decisions have raised concerns. How interesting, I said with a neutral smile. Let me know if anything changes. 3 days later, Veronica resigned from the board. Citing personal reasons. 2 more board members followed suit by week's end. Karen, meanwhile, began to spiral. She spread rumors that the lake was polluted, rumors I quickly silenced with third-party water quality reports confirming the lake was cleaner than it had been in years. Her desperation turned dangerous. She approached Merrick Henderson with an offer: full erasure of his HOA violations, a seat on a restructured board, and a paid stipend. All he had to do was convince me to sell the lake. Unfortunately for Karen, Merrick is a retired ethics attorney, and he recorded every word. "I can make those violation notices disappear," her voice purred through the speaker as Merrick played the recording for me. "There'd be a place for you on the new board, with a stipend, of course. Just convince Thorncraft to sell. Mention insurance costs. Environmental liabilities. Scare him." Merrick grinned. "She forgot the first rule of being a villain," he said. "Never try to bribe an ethics lawyer." But Karen hadn't hit rock bottom yet. Late one night, my security system pinged. Footage showed Karen and 2 remaining board members trespassing on my property, ostensibly to collect water samples. But the camera didn't lie. It caught her uncapping a small bottle and pouring something into the water, right where the kids usually fished. I sent the footage straight to the police. Karen was arrested for criminal trespassing and attempted environmental contamination. As she was processed, authorities opened an investigation into HOA financial irregularities under her leadership. What they found triggered further probes: misappropriated funds, retaliatory fines, and even a scheme to drive down property values before her real estate partners swooped in. 2 weeks later, I invited every resident, except the remaining HOA leadership, to a meeting at my home. They came. Nearly every household. I laid out my proposal: I would transfer the lake to a newly formed community trust. But there were conditions. 1. A total restructuring of the HOA board, with term limits and transparent voting. 2. A review and reform of all HOA regulations. 3. The creation of an independent ethics committee with rotating community members to oversee board actions. Then came my final card, one not even Merrick or Samuel knew about. "Many of you don't know this," I said, "but over the past month, I've been quietly purchasing mortgage notes from Lakeside National Bank." The room tensed. "That includes Karen Wellington's home," I added, letting the silence settle. Yes, I had used my banking ties, and Samuel's connections, to acquire the mortgage debt on nearly 20% of the neighborhood's properties, targeting Karen and her closest allies. It was perfectly legal. And it gave me all the leverage I needed. "I have no interest in foreclosures," I assured them. "In fact, I'm offering refinancing options at below-market rates. But first, we fix this system." The vote to replace the HOA board was nearly unanimous. Karen resigned in disgrace. Charged with trespassing. Facing civil suits. Her real estate license under investigation. Her house, now toxic real estate, sat unsold for months before she left town altogether. Safra Dusklund was elected HOA president. She promised reforms. She delivered. We renamed the lake Rachel's Lake, in memory of my wife. Ownership was transferred to the trust, with binding terms guaranteeing access to all residents, forever. 3 months after it all began, Seelan and I hosted a community fishing day. Families mingled. Children laughed. People who once lived in the same neighborhood but not the same world finally saw each other. That evening, as we sat on the dock and watched the sun dip below Rachel's Lake, Seelan leaned against me. "Mom would be proud of you, Dad," she whispered, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since Rachel died. I nodded, heart full. "I think she'd be proud of both of us, kiddo." A year later, our neighborhood had become a model of HOA reform. Other communities adopted our blueprint. Karen vanished from public life. Mayor James Wilson, once her ally, declined to run for re-election. They asked me to run. I said no. Instead, I founded a scholarship fund in Rachel's name, for kids who lost a parent to cancer. Because sometimes the best way to beat a bully isn't to fight them head-on. It's to change the rules of the game entirely. And if you're watching this video, living your own HOA nightmare, never forget. Patience is power. And justice always finds a way.